Hey, it's Ryan from 2minutetennis.net, and in this video, I'm going to give you 2 tips to improve every stroke in your game. Please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Even share this video with a friend, as those are the best ways to support this channel. So in this video, I'm going to be using the Topspin Pro. It is an awesome product. I am an affiliate. You can check out my affiliate link in the description below. If you're a coach, a parent, or player, definitely pick up a Topspin Pro. So the first stroke I want to help you with is the Topspin Forehand. And this is what I call 2-1-2, but it's very simple. These are the 2 tips I want to give you to improve your Topspin Forehand. I want you to turn with 2 hands. That's the first tip. Then after hitting, oh, by the way, using my daughter's racket because the ceiling is low here in my basement, so I have to use the racket so I don't put a hole in the ceiling, right? So I'm going to turn with 2 hands. And I'm going to finish with 2 hands. So it's 2, 1, 2. So the 2 tips I've got for you are turn with 2 hands during the take back. So as the ball comes to you, take the racket back with 2 hands and then finish with 2 hands. If you think about a row of dominoes, right? So you've got 10 dominoes standing on end. Well, if the first domino falls, and then the last domino falls, you kind of know what happened in the middle. All the dominoes fell. If you can make the beginning of your swing really good with both hands on the racket, and then when you finish with both hands, and that's a really good way to finish on your forehand as well, then the middle kind of, in a cool way, takes care of itself. So for the forehand, turn with 2 hands and finish with 2 hands on the racket. That's the 2-1-2. It's how many hands are on the racket during the stroke. All right, let's talk about the one-handed topspin backhand. So the 2 tips. The first tip is we want to make sure that prior to hitting the ball, let me actually show you this from the back view. Prior to hitting the ball, you want to close the racket face. So before you hit the ball, have your racket tilted down. You don't want your racket on its edge when it's in the back, because I guess I'll show you this from the side actually. When your racket is on edge in the back and then you swing up, the racket will be open. So then the ball goes out, right? And that's when you have to start rolling your racket to try to time it so that the strings face forward at contact. It's so much easier just to tilt the strings down prior to contact, and then your strings will face forward as you brush up the back of the ball. So the first tip on your one-handed backhand is to close the racket face prior to hitting the ball. That way, when you swing up to contact, your strings will face forward. We're going to be brushing up the back of the ball, and here's the second tip. If you are right-handed, I want you to finish with the racket to the left of your hand. This is something that completely transforms amateur, recreational player one-handers, because what it does is it keeps your wrist position fixed. A lot of players, they try to copy the Gasquet and the Dimitrov and the Wawrinka finish, where there's a lot of play in the forearm and the racket rolls over to the right again if they're right-handed. But all that does is it compromises the contact. It makes it so that there might be a lot going on during the contact, and it makes your ball spray. If you're struggling with your one-handed backhand, I want you, close the racket face, but I want you to finish, if you're right-handed, with the left side of the letter V. That keeps the wrist angle you had at contact intact, and it makes your strings face towards your target for a really long time. I don't want you to just take my word for this. You can go look at Federer, you can look at Dominic Thiem, Tsitsipas, hitting return of serves. Watch how they finish the return of serve, and the racket stays to the left of their hand. Again, if you are a lefty, then you're going to finish with the racket to the right side of the letter V. The reason I'm saying the letter V, it's this, right? So as a right-handed, your racket is tilted to the left of your hand. Watch Kopil when he hits a down-the-line passing shot. That racket stays to the left of his hands. You don't have to always snap your forearm. If you're struggling with consistency on your one-handed backhand, finish with the racket to the appropriate side of the letter V. You'll see a drastic difference. Now, for the two-handers, my 2 suggestions really are going to be the exact same. Make sure that prior to hitting the ball, your strings are pointing down, and then as you swing up, the racket stays to the left of your hands if you're right-handed. Now, and by the way, this is what you see Djokovic do. I would say between 60 to 70% of the time on Novak Djokovic's backhand, as he swings up, the racket stays to the left of his hands. That means he's not using his wrist and like casting the racket, pointing the strings in a bunch of different places. This is what allows him to be so incredibly precise and accurate and consistent and really make us all jealous with how awesome his backhand is. But don't just stop here. You can still let the racket relax if you'd like. But please, as you come up, if you're right-handed, keep the racket to the left of your hands as you go. Again, this is going to lengthen how long your strings face towards your target, and you're really going to have pinpoint accuracy. All right, let's talk about the underspin forehand. Now, it's usually called the slice, but I've found that when players try to put a lot of spin on the ball, they end up not hitting a great slice forehand. So I like to call it underspin, so it's going to be a moderate amount of underspin. The first thing I want you to know is the movement of the racket. I want you to move the racket like it's a canoe, where it's slightly down and then slightly back up again. So if I'm hitting the ball this way, I want you to think in your mind, you're going to go slightly down to contact and then slightly back up. And I guess a third tip, I'll make it 3 here. When you're done, finish in your non-hitting hand. So you're going to go slightly down to contact and then slightly back up, catching the racket in your non-hitting hand. I guess the third tip I'm going to tell you when it comes to the underspin is don't feel like you've got to have a racket that's wide open. If your racket's wide open, then that's when you're going to feel like you got to really chop. Surprisingly, on a slice or underspin forehand, whatever you want to call it, the racket is very straight up and down at contact. I don't want you to think that the racket's supposed to be 45 degrees open when hitting a slice, and you'll hear about this on the backhand as well, but the racket's not supposed to be 45 degrees open. If you're a golfer, you understand that if the club face is open at 45 degrees and you make contact, that's not called a putter, right? The club face is open 45 degrees, that ball is going way up into the air. So you don't want the racket that wide open, otherwise that's when the ball pops up. And I have people who ask, why is my slice always popping up? And I will ask them, how open do you think the racket's supposed to be? And I've had people say more than 45 degrees, almost like this. Well, no wonder the ball's going to go up. So you've got to have the racket very straight up and down at contact, even when hitting a slice forehand. So I want you to think of going slightly down to contact with a racket face that's very straight up and down, less than 10 degrees open. The lower the contact, the more open it'll be. The higher the contact, the less open. It'll be very square. And then go to your non-hitting hand. So slightly down and slightly back up, like you're drawing a smile in a smiley face. Going to this non-hitting hand to catch and guide the racket towards your target, and make sure that at contact your racket is very straight up and down. And all these things you can either shadow swing at home, as I'm doing here in my basement, or you can be doing this out on the court as well, or both, right? That'd be the best recipe. Let's talk about it on the slice backhand or the underspin backhand. Same idea. I'm going to make it 3 tips again on the underspin backhand. A lot of players struggle with the slice backhand because, universally coaches teach use a continental grip. Well, for players just learning the slice backhand, the continental grip can actually have the racket, as I mentioned, wide open. So then you get this really weak slice that the ball kind of floats, just sits around no man's land or the service line, and your opponents can really attack it. So something you can do is actually change your grip a little farther, not all the way over to an Eastern backhand where your hand is straight up on top of the racket, but think in between bevels 2 and 1, bevel 2 being the continental, bevel 1 being the Eastern backhand. Turn your grip a little farther. That's an easy hack as a way to get the racket more vertical at contact. So we've got the farther grip. We're going to go slightly down to contact, making sure that the racket is straight up and down, and then slightly back up again. And when we're done, we're going to separate our arms, kind of like we're saying safe. So get the grip over a little farther than you typically do if you're struggling with your slice backhand. Move the racket again like that smile, like you're drawing a smiley face. The racket is going to go down to contact and then back up again, making sure that the racket's straight up and down at contact or nearly straight up and down, and then you're going to separate your hands when you're done. All right, let's talk about the volleys. One of the biggest mistakes I see players making with their volleys is they don't set the racket where the ball is going to arrive. When the ball is coming to you, if the ball's going to be up here, set your racket there. If the ball, when it arrives, is going to be here, set your racket here. I do a lot of video analysis lessons for players. They send me videos of their technique. We do a live Zoom call, like a private Zoom call. And I sit there and I diagram their strokes with them. And when I help players with their volleys, it almost always happens where the players say, I don't like low volleys. And then I watch them. They set the racket up here and then the ball arrives here. You will gain great consistency and reliability and trust in your volleys if you just see the ball coming and kind of look into the future and find out where the ball is going to arrive and then set your racket there. So you can't just look out 30 feet in front of you and say, okay, the ball is at eye level 30 or 40 feet out in front of me. Well, where is it going to be when it arrives? Right? You don't want to set the racket here, and then when the ball arrives, it's at your knees, and then you're chopping, you're slamming your racket against the ground. You've got to set the racket at the height of contact, and then move your racket through contact, putting very little spin on the ball. You want to put a little backspin on the ball, that's fine, but set the racket at the height of contact. On the backhand volley, well, first let's do the forehand volley. Setting the racket at the contact and then going hand to hand. So from the side, it looks like this. Set the racket at the height of contact and then go hand to hand. If the ball's going to be up here, I immediately go up to this point and then I go hand to hand. It's almost like I'm putting my racket on a bookshelf and I'm sweeping along a bookshelf, sweeping the books along a bookshelf. So you're going to set the racket at the height of contact, wherever contact is going to be, and then you're going to go immediately to the other hand, as a right hander, my left hand. On the one-handed backhand, you're going to set the racket at the height of contact, and this is a big, big one. The back elbow needs to be up. When you set the racket at the height of contact, you don't want your elbow down because then your racket's wide open. And that's where you're going to get a lot of chop and the ball's going to pop up. You want this back elbow up, so as a right-hander, this is my left elbow. My left elbow's up, and I've set my racket at the height of contact. And then I'm going to move my racket through contact. Again, I'm not trying to put a ton of backspin on the ball. If it rotates a few times, that's great. But it's not like the more slice I put on this ball, the better. Especially if you're watching this video because you don't like your volleys. Putting a lot of slice is just going to make your backhand consistency even worse. So get your back elbow up, set the racket at the height of contact, and then volley. If the ball's going to come down to your feet, then set your racket down here. And then you volley. You're not going to try to set the racket high and then chop. If it's a high volley, this is really important. This back elbow has got to be up. This is where people get in trouble on high volleys. They drop this elbow, the racket is open, and then they flick at it or they chop right down. You want to set the racket at the height of contact, back elbows up. You can see my racket is like a wall, and then I volley. Set the racket on both sides at the height of contact. Make sure on the forehand you go to your non-hitting hand, and on the backhand that your back elbow is up as you're doing that. Let's talk about the overhead. It's universally known that on the overhead that we got to get sideways. So when a ball goes up in the air, and I see most players do this correctly. Most players, the ball goes up in the air and they get sideways. Some point at the ball. I'm a big fan of turning with both hands on the racket, the way you see Federer do it. But it's important that we stay sideways. So what I want you to practice, you can do this in your house. Notice I'm going to get sideways to you and then I'm going to stay sideways, or what feels to be sideways. I'm not going to face forward when I'm done. A big mistake I see is players turn sideways and then they face forward and then bend from their waist. Staying sideways will actually help you stay taller and you'll hit the net less. So first tip on your overhead, turn sideways and stay sideways. The second tip is work on hitting spin on your overheads. Don't think of overheads as balls that you crush. It's fun to watch and it's fun to hit, it really is, but it's not reliable. Your percentages go way down. I don't want you to think of hitting overheads really hard, but rather being precise with your overheads. And just like on a serve, adding spin is actually what helps you gain control. That's why you spin a second serve. You're gaining control by adding spin. So you're going to stay sideways for your first tip on the overhead, and then you're going to spin your overhead in order to either hit side spin, or if you really swing up enough, you can get a little topspin on the ball, which is really great when you're moving backward hitting an overhead. But those two tips, staying sideways and adding spin to your overheads where you're sliding along the ball, getting the ball to rotate is going to make you much more consistent. And then on the serve, and you know this from the videos I've made recently about knocking the birthday hat off, the first tip is make sure that on your serve that you knock a birthday hat off of your head. You could do this by just tossing and feeling like you're saluting, that you're just making this move with your palm down. So toss and then feel like you're saluting, but just slide the racket onto your head, right? That's gonna get you out of the waiter's tray. So it's so common. Players get into this waiter's tray position, strings facing up, and then they just push forward. And they lack the circular swing that you see the pros use. So practice with a birthday hat on your head, knocking the birthday hat off. I'm not wearing the birthday hat because most people don't have a birthday hat, so I just want you to know what it looks like without it. Have the racket just slide with the strings pointing down, slide the racket onto your head, much like you are saluting. And then just like on the overhead, I want you to practice in your mind, if you have to, or on the court, hit side spin serves. I've noticed that on YouTube, flat serves, like really fast serves, and kick serves are some of the most popular videos that players are searching for, and the views on those videos always go way up, which is great. But slice serves, in my opinion, are underrated severely. And adding slice or side spin to your serve is a great way to still hit a fast serve, but gain the control you're looking for that you would also achieve on the kick serve. And it's actually, frankly, easier to hit than a good kick serve. So you want to slide along your serve. So practice knocking a birthday hat off your head like you're saluting to use the proper throwing motion, the knock the birthday hat off idea like Naomi Osaka, like Roger Federer, like Nick Kyrgios, and then practice hitting side spin on your serve. Lead with the edge. After you come in over your head, lead with the edge of the racket to get that ball spinning. You can do all of these ideas in your house. Right now, I'm in my basement. You can shadow swing every single one of these ideas. When it comes to your forehand, turn with both hands and finish with both hands. On both your one-handed and two-handed backhands, make sure you close the racket face prior to contact. That'll allow you to brush up the back of the ball. Strings are pointing down on both, and then with the one-hander, you're gonna stay sideways, but as a righty, your racket's gonna be to the left of your hand. As a two-hander, I want you to go up just like Djokovic. The racket stays to the left of the hand, but because the hips turned, then anatomically, it just makes a little more sense to have a follow-through that goes over your shoulder. But again, the racket stays to the left of your hands as you go up. On the forehand, your forehand slice, you're gonna go slightly down and then slightly back up again, going to this hand, and you're gonna make sure the racket is very straight up and down at contact. Don't think that you're trying to put as much backspin on the ball as possible. That's not how it works. It's not like the more ketchup I put on a French fry, the better. In some things, like little things in moderation is actually gonna be the best thing. So go slightly down and then slightly back up again with the racket very vertical at contact. On the slice backhand, get your grip a little farther than you normally do. You're gonna go slightly down and then slightly back up again, staying sideways. And again, the racket's very straight up and down at contact. On the volleys, set the racket at the height of contact, and on the forehand, go to your non-hitting hand. If the ball's gonna be high, set it high, and then go to your non-hitting hand. If the ball's gonna be low, don't set it here. The ball's gonna be low. Set it low, and then go to your non-hitting hand. On the backhand volley, turn with your back elbow up. Doesn't matter if you're a one-hander or a two-handed volley. That back elbow has got to be up. And then you're just gonna move the racket straight through contact with a very flat swing. You can put a little backspin on the ball, that's fine. But set the racket at the height of contact with this back elbow up, and then move your racket straight through contact. On the overhead, stay sideways and add side spin. Don't face forward and pull down. You'll dump the ball in the net over and over again. And then on the serve, slide the racket in over your head like you're saluting, and then make sure you've got a slice serve, because you can use a slice serve for your first serve and for your second serve. It's so versatile. You start applying these tips to all of your strokes, there is no doubt you're going to gain confidence, win more matches, and play much better tennis. This is Ryan Reedy from 2minutetennis.net. You got this.